Welcome to another edition of NAHL Coach's Corner. I'm Alex Kyrias. We are fortunate enough today to be joined by the head coach of the Aberdeen Wings and one of the most tenured coaches in North American Hockey League history, Mr. Scott Langer. Scott, how you doing today?
Fantastic. And you?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for joining us here on NAHL Coach's Corner, our debut edition. So you're first up, and it's probably noteworthy and apropos that you're first in this one, as you're the most tenured head coach in the NAHL right now. Your team was the last team to win the Robertson Cup, but I have to get your thoughts about the last 3 months. It's obviously been anything but normal. Your thoughts, just what has transpired since the cancellation of the season back on March 16th?
Yeah, it's been for me. It's been a lot of having to adapt. You usually have so much structure from the time the season ends to your camps to your season beginning. It's usually busier than the regular season, so it's about adapting. And every day is a new day for me. Just trying to continue to move forward and be ready for the season coming up, and hopefully we start on time. It all ended so quick, and for me that was a first. I wasn't able to talk to our guys that are moving on to college hockey. I wasn't able to talk to the guys about returning here to Aberdeen and what I thought and what we both thought about how they played this season. It was really an interesting year, when it was all done. We went from games being canceled to optional practices is what we were allowed to have. But the day we were going to have our optional practice, the plug was pulled, and the players were to leave town right away. So that was interesting. That was to have no closure with those guys after spending so much time with them. That was difficult for me. But obviously, I was able to follow up with them later through a phone conversation, and then obviously we talk to those guys. So a very unique situation, that's for sure.
One of the things we're trying to do, Scott, is give people out there an idea of what's happening in your community. You being in Aberdeen, South Dakota, give us right now a snapshot of what's happening in the community. Are things opening up? How's it looking there in Aberdeen?
Well, we're one state that never really closed. Being such a rural type state, the governor left it up to each individual city to monitor their own city. So we were never really closed down. We were able to go to the stores and go to work and back and forth. We weren't locked down at home, which has been very good for me because I rather do my stuff from an office and be focused. So it's we're one state. When you watch it really close, or one state that never really had a whole lot of restrictions. Few ordinances, but everything's pretty much open here in South Dakota. So it gives us a little to be optimistic moving forward. And I know some states are still in their first phases and they're closed down, but we're real optimistic here in Aberdeen that things are going to go on as they should.
About a month ago, the NAHL had its new supplemental draft, and I'm wondering, entering that draft, how did you feel it went? Obviously, you've got a lot of guys moving on from a very good team this past season, but ultimately, take a look back at the supplemental draft, and did it accomplish what you wanted it to?
Well, I think so. We were all fighting over whether we utilize additional tenders or have supplemental draft, and I think the league came up with a great idea utilizing the supplemental draft, because I think as a league, as big as our league is and popular as our league is, I think we had to stay relevant. And to have a draft when we had it, here in Aberdeen, we lost guys like Cooper Haar and Jacob Rowe and Mac Byers and Riley Murphy, guys that are really, really tough to replace, guys that did some real big things in this league. So, for us, we were able to get out in front and secure some guys that are going to fill some of those roles moving to next year. But I thought for our league, waiting for just one draft later in July wasn't the best idea. We had to stay relevant. We had to stay out in front of things, and I think our league accomplished that.
Speaking of the draft in July, July 21st is the entry draft. Teams are having tryout camps before that. Looking at these tryout camps, is there a particular success story, maybe since you've been in Aberdeen, of a player that made the team via the tryout that went on to have an incredible impact for you guys and later on, maybe success in the NCAA?
Well, if you just look recently, you look at a guy like Pearson Brandon, who showed up at our pre-draft camp in 2018. He ended up playing in the top four of our defensive core and won a Robertson Cup. He came back as one of our captains, secured a scholarship at Colgate. He'll play there next year, and he went all the way through the camp process. And probably a kid that shouldn't have slipped through the tender process. But we were very fortunate enough to have a player like Pearson come through that camp process. And boy, was he good in camp, and we couldn't wait to get our hooks on him in the draft, and we were able to secure him in the draft. And I tell you, I'll take a lot more Pearson Brandons on this hockey team, the character and the type of young man he is, and obviously he's a two-time prospect player in our league. So he was an outstanding find coming through the camp process.
I want to put you in the time machine a little bit and take you back to a year ago when you were prepping for being the head coach of Team NAHL at the Kyrias World Junior Cup in Sochi, Russia. We know that it's been canceled this year, so looking ahead to 2021 and not knowing who's going to be leading that team or anything like that, but based on your experience as the head coach of that team, I'm wondering what type of advice you have for the future leadership of that team, the future coaches of that team, based on your experience last year.
Well, I think you have to really embrace that entire thing, and if you get the honor to coach that team, you got to dive in right away. It's about getting your players to be a team quicker than you're used to. During the season, you get to ease into it with training camp and the start of the season and an exhibition, and you kind of battle test your players, and they become a hockey team. When you put something together with individual players throughout the entire league, you kind of have to work really quick. And as soon as you're selected as that coach, one, you have to embrace it. You have to want to be there because it is such a special event, and the caliber of play there is high end. Like we were playing against teams that had 8 NHL draft picks, as you know, and here we are, a select team from the North American Hockey League. So we have to make sure, one, as a league, we take the very best that are going to showcase our league and really put us on the map and be able to play with the top teams in the world. And if you're a coach there, you have to get your game plan together right away. As soon as you're selected, it's time to go to work. And if I was to do it again, obviously, as soon as I was named, I would be on each one of those players that is selected, and we would start that process right away. And hopefully, I know the league talked about somewhat of a training camp process, which would be so valuable, not just to the players, but the coaching staff. Get to know your players because, when we went there, the players didn't really know the coaches. We each had a player from our teams, but to be able to establish a relationship with your guys, sooner than later, I think can go a long way.
Finally, Scott, an incredible year for the Aberdeen Wings in terms of NCAA commitments, following the trend the league has had for a number of years now, where seem to keep outdoing yourself, and now on average you're seeing 12, 13 players a year get an NCAA commitment. That was more for you guys this year, particularly in the Division I category. How satisfying is it for you as a coach to look back on this year, see those type of commitments, see those type of schools that players committed to, and knowing that ultimately that's probably the number one goal of all this?
Well, it is. It's you have to be really lucky, and things have to really click in order to win a championship. But putting kids in the school and doing it, by the dozens, that's really satisfying. I know for our ownership group here in Aberdeen and for myself, we all want to win every single day, no matter what we're trying to do. But spending a lot of time and getting our players out there in front of these coaches and for these colleges to identify that, the Aberdeen Wings have 14 Division I type players. That's extremely satisfying. And, it starts from the identification process with the, guys like Steve Jennings and our scouting staff. They don't just find talent, they find complete young men with their academics and their character, and all that stuff plays into going to college. You can't just be a good hockey player anymore and find your way on a Division I roster. You really got to be the complete package. And those guys are moving players in here to Aberdeen that really are the whole package, and they're phenomenal young men. And obviously they can play hockey as well. So extremely gratifying when we put players, we get excited when there's a commitment. Our whole staff is excited here in Aberdeen, and it makes for a great day.
Well, Scott Langer, thank you again for joining us here on the debut edition of NAHL Coach's Corner. Stay safe, have a great tryout camp, and we hope to talk to you again during the entry draft on July 21st.
Thanks, Alex.
Scott Langer of the Aberdeen Wings, thank you again for joining us for another edition of NAHL Coach's Corner.